Hey all, this short segment of a talk I gave in Salisbury, UK, a few days ago will really help you understand cholesterol and its problems or its advantages, and of course the statin class of drugs and the side effects, the cost benefit, the risk reward. So I think that sticking to the published data only and being very, very careful, this will really help people with those cholesterol and statin drug questions. So do share it with relations or friends who are concerned about this arena. They may not see the data very easily these days, especially, so it'll give them the opportunity to make their own informed decision on these matters. So enjoy.
I'm going to go ahead, and I was up in Keto Brain Health conference in Manchester yesterday, and we had Zoe Harcombe and Dr. Anthony Chaffee, some of you may know, and myself. Now, they asked me to actually do something on statins and side effects. So I did a full talk, but I'm just going to do the last 20 minutes on the side effects and statins bit, because I covered a lot of other stuff. But I just think it's interesting because so many people, even they know the corruption that you saw in the movie, but they still think, oh, they're worried about heart disease, they're scared, so they just take them anyway. So I just thought I'd try and kill this nonsense for once and for all. So this one here is really important. On the left, this study, Western white men, and as you go from left to right, you're going up from 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, age. So obviously the calcification they see in the coronary calcium scan, the ultimate test for heart disease, they see it go up. And as you go back into the graph, you've just got the worst segments of the white male population in America. The calcification goes up to 4,500 points of calcium. So obviously on the left you see the Western men are riddled with heart disease. It's shocking, right? And we know that. That's why we have so many heart attacks. But on the right you have sane men, like with like, and they did the same calcium scan, the same 250 slice CT machine. It's a fair compare. Where's the heart disease, right? So in engineering, we use Kepner-Trago, and we use a lot of tools to answer what causes are. And distinctions are the key thing. If you find a set of parts or a population that is riddled with the problem, and you've got a set of equivalent parts that has effectively no problem, you know the cause is in the distinctions between them. It's not genetic, by the way. Catavans are the same. It's not genetic. So what are the distinctions? Well, these guys have very low insulin levels, not measurable in some cases, okay? So that's a big distinction. And we know high insulin drives heart disease, so that's a big one. And they're very low blood glucose over here. So that's obviously a huge difference. They have no diabetic physiology, basically. And heart disease, we kind of know anyway, is the vascular disease of type 2 diabetes, overwhelmingly. So this makes sense. They have no hypertension here. So get a 75-year-old, get a 60-year-old in the West. Half the people over 50 have hypertension. Over here, no one has. And hypertension obviously is a big deal, and they don't have it. No central obesity here. They don't have this, okay? Fair enough. And they have no autoimmune conditions, and there's an epidemic of autoimmunity in the West. Autoimmunity drives cardiovascular disease progression. So we've basically got all the differences, and they have no metabolic syndrome or hyperinsulinemia syndrome. That on one study tells you the drivers of heart disease, but you could say there could be another one, like these guys in big pharma say cholesterol. So maybe that's also a driver. Well, we better look at their cholesterol and see, is that a difference? Because if it's not a difference, that ends the cholesterol hypothesis. One example ends it if there's a negative. So let's say, and actually we have their ApoB, bad cholesterol particle counts, which is the real measure of cholesterol in heart disease. It's not the LDL you get in a normal test. Even the industry acknowledges it's ApoB, the number of LDL bad cholesterol parts or pieces is the measure. And these guys have the same or higher LDL particle counts as the guys who are riddled. That's the end of the cholesterol hypothesis. Now, I have 1,000 other pieces of data. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick here in the UK wrote a book, The Clot Thickens. He lists them all. But this ends it on its own because of Professor Karl Popper and the asymmetry of proof. If you find a negative, clear as crystal proof, it beats 50,000 positive suggestions that cholesterol causes heart disease. So that's important. So if cholesterol is out of the picture, well, what about the cholesterol lowering drugs? Maybe they have other mechanisms that help. This slide is just, I got all the papers I could around 8 years ago that had insulin and glucose measured and also measured bad cholesterol and looked at heart disease. And across the board with what I could find, insulin and glucose were highly significantly linked to the amount of heart disease, and bad cholesterol, which we see all the time, was not significant, or even lower cholesterol linked to more heart disease. So we closed the cholesterol one. So to get onto statins and side effects, they wanted me to talk about. So yeah, each capsule contains your medication plus a treatment for each of its side effects. Fair enough. There's so many books and publications exposing the statin nonsense that how can I add to it? So what I decided to do was I'm going to selectively only take published data and avoid all anecdotes in as much as I could and try and see what's published. And by the way, that book, yeah, Clot Thickens from Malcolm is excellent. Yeah, it's totally out of there. So one picture here, like a few minutes ago, in a way, gives you the answer. So statins cut off a big part of the mevalonate pathway. And I won't read through them, but it's a crucial pathway. I mean, geraniol is way down it, and that's crucial for loads of bodily components and health and hormone creation and bone strength and muscle function. You're cutting off a whole pathway that's been preserved for millions of years in mammals. So you know they're going to cause a problem. Right, that's a given. So the only way you'd take them is if there's an incredible, massive benefit. Right? It has to be stunning. Like on average, you get 10 years extra life on a statin, something like that. Right? You'd have to. So the industry itself did papers on this. So it's not just me, statin toxicity, but the industry people, their first sentence is a total lie. So it's interesting when you start a paper with a complete lie in the first sentence. But that doesn't bother these guys. There is now overwhelming evidence to support lowering bad cholesterol to reduce cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. Actually, they claim mortality. So that's complete nonsense, but that's their first sentence. But what I liked about the paper is they elucidated beautifully all of the side effects of statins, including neuronal membranes, myelin sheath, nerve synapses, serotonin reductions. Like the red boxes, they admit all of these negative effects. So again, the statins would have to give you an incredible benefit to take on this mess, okay? So, back in the conundrum I did in 2013, I went through this graph, and I'm going to show it real quickly because it's a kind of a personal story at the time. So as you go across the bottom, it's increasing the bad cholesterol right up to 5.68 millimoles. That's huge bad cholesterol, LDL. And as you go up there on the left is your heart disease risk. So if you're at 1 here, you're an average person. If you're down lower in the green, you have a way lower risk of heart disease. And if you're up in the red, you have a higher. As the bad cholesterol is higher across the population of Framingham, yeah, the risk seems to go slightly up. It's only associational. But it's really here that the bad cholesterol makes it go up a good bit. But then you got to see decreasing the good cholesterol, HDL, is up here. So all of this part of the graph is people with low good cholesterol. And all that means is they're insulin resistant diabetic, which is the real cause. So if you're down here with high good cholesterol, then the LDL doesn't even make an associational difference. So everything is to do with the good cholesterol, but everything about the good cholesterol is to do with insulin resistance, which is the cause. Right? So hopefully that's clear. And at the time, over 10 years ago, would you statinate this guy? No, he's got one of the lowest risks you can have in the population. But that was a relation of ours, and he told me he thought it was the statins. He got to the point he could hardly walk after being hill climbing 4,000 foot mountains, super fit, excellent family history, beautiful blood work. But because he was high in the bad cholesterol, regardless of all of his other great metrics and his low Framingham risk, they put him on maximum strength Lipitor because they're donkeys, sadly. So I told him about this, and I showed him this graph, and I said, look, I'm not going to give medical advice, but I just kind of showed him, and he has an engineering background. And a few weeks later, I asked him how he's getting on, and we were at a family event. He didn't want people to know about the medication being dumped, but his words were, I got my life back. Big deal. I personally know many people like that, not from my network or social media. I mean, just personally, I know many people like that. So you know how big this problem is. It's big. So what's the benefit of statins? The only measure that means anything really, if we're honest, is mortality and life extension. Because nudging around deck chairs in the Titanic, it's just silly. Obviously, if statins are a wonder drug, which they claim, you're going to get a big extension of life for people with heart issues. British Medical Journal, 2015. Once I saw this paper, the case was closed for me. Okay? With 3 or 4 or 5 years approximately use of statins from pharma's own trial results, this team went in and for the first time looked at what's the average life extension you get for drugging yourself for several years. And it's 3 to 4 days, which is 0. Because 3 days and 3 years, it's 0. If it was 30 days, it would be 0, because it's just noise to an engineer. That's what you're taking on the destruction of your mevalonate pathway and everything else for. It's absurd. And in a study here where they used the calcium scan, and they said, well, what about people with 0 calcium score, which is half the people in their 50s? What about those people? And they found that statin versus no statin, large numbers of people, 0 difference over 12 years. 0 benefit. And that's half the population as a 0 score. The other half, they show an associational benefit, but I know it's nonsense, but I just thought I'd show this. So these people are clowns. The people pushing these drugs are clowns. Unfortunately, they're kind of that type of clown, right? They're not the nice clown, right? So numbers needed to treat. It was mentioned in the movie there with Asim and Donal. Benefits, no statistically significant mortality benefit. So for me, I'm gone. I'm out of the doctor's surgery. I'm getting in my car. I'm driving away. I just say, you jokers, you're telling me you're giving me a drug that you say is fantastic and it doesn't extend life? So how can it not? Heart disease is the biggest killer. Heart attack's the biggest killer in the world. And you're telling me it doesn't extend my life. Then it can't do jack. Okay then. 1 in 217 avoided a non-fatal heart attack. 1 in 300 avoided a non-fatal stroke. These are the numbers they can fudge in the trials. That's why they can claim them, right? But even then, big deal. 1 in 20 pain from muscle damage. And the NNT actually doesn't cover all the other stuff. They actually, we don't have much data on that. It's anecdotal because they won't allow anyone to do a trial to show it. Basically, they shut them off at the ethics committee stage. 1 in 200 develop diabetes mellitus, which is the root cause of heart disease, vascular disease. And 1 in 200 get it extra. So hopefully you can see it's actually farcical, it's risible. This one, the scientific statement, I'm going to run through that because it's just nonsense. They completely try to dismiss neurological effects. Oh, well, we see mostly non-serious reversible forgetfulness. But it's just their wording, you can tell. They've already decided their message. So I got some of the papers that actually looked at the problem. This one looked at the FDA warning for neurological damage. And they did go on about certain statins that are lipophilic or they're kind of fat-loving or fat-compatible molecules. They tend to cross the blood-brain barrier, so they're going to be worse. So they kind of focused on saying, well, yeah, the lipophilic ones are worse. But for the lipophilic, which are, I think, atorvastatin, I think, Lipitor, the massive one, I think that's lipophilic, yeah. 2.6 times the risk in the trials, which have worked hard to hide all side effects. 2.5 hazard ratio or odds ratio of having neurological significant side effects. So, like, it's in their literature, but I'll tell you at the end why I would be worried that these numbers are much bigger. This one here, they took Alzheimer's patients and they decided to take them off their statin, and then the key thing, put them back on 6 weeks later. You know, so you really see what contribution do they have. And they noted, and this is the big problem, barriers to recruitment, difficulty getting consent from subjects' caregivers or legal representatives, because you see, they don't want to give consent to take you off a drug because you might have a heart attack. This is the wall to stop you finding out. Subjects' desire to obtain approval from their primary care provider. Right? Once you go and get approval, primary care, they're looking for statin side effects? Oh, so they're anti-statin people? No, right? And reluctance, again, giving consent. So this is the wall that stops you getting the data. But they did get a bunch of them. And pretty clear on this mini mental state examination. You can see the scores from 10 to 30. When they took them off the statin, their scores almost doubled in many cases. I mean, quite a dramatic thing in a well-run trial. And then, of course, they brought the statin back in to make sure that that wasn't just because they were, you know, sometimes in trials when you work with someone and they're in a trial, they feel better. You know, but this is an assessment, so, but it's a little risk. So they put them back on the statin and they dropped straight back down in the scores where they were. So this is quite powerful data. It's probably one of the best ones we have documented because they don't want any of this documented. I'm going to go fast here. I won't go through, but there's loads of mechanisms as to why they would cause cognitive damage and decline. And this is a reference. That paper I showed you had many references, and I just looked at a couple, and this one was quite nice. They had 143 patients who stopped statin therapy because they thought they had a problem. 90% reported improvement in cognitive problems, sometimes within days of discontinuing. And really, this one just marries with their results in their actual trial. It just all lines up. So again, it's a big deal. Median time to first noted recovery, or the kind of general time to recovery, couple of weeks. And that's what we saw in the person I mentioned earlier, the relation. Within a week or two, he got his life back, you know. So these are big problems. And of interest in some patients, the diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease reportedly was reversed. So to show you, some people in all probability have quite dramatic effects. And the guy, Dwayne, he's passed away now, the NASA astronaut, he wrote Lipitor, Thief of Memory. And you know how smart astronauts are. I mean, all the sciences, mathematics, they're at the top of the heap. When he took the Lipitor, he literally began to forget where he left his car. And then he went off it himself because he associated with this new drug they told him he had to take. And he recovered, and then he self-challenged and went back to verify, and it came back again, brain fog. So that's another, he wrote a whole book on that, Thief of Memory. Quality of life in all these people in this study was significantly adversely affected for 7 different assessed domains of quality of life. And you can see the P number is 0.0001. There was a dramatic change. Significant statistically, no problem. This is from David Diamond, a pal of mine. I just asked him when I was giving this talk, guys, send me some of your statin side effects stuff. And it was just a slide he had, and it just shows all of the other published papers. But they try to not have these papers published, so that's why we don't have that many. But it of course affects testosterone, erectile dysfunction, because the mevalonate pathway with geranyl, geraniol, and precursors for hormones. Just look at the mechanism of statins and you know exactly what you're going to see. You're going to see systemic problems any or all over the place. And that's what we do. This one, Dr. Kendrick did a great blog. I'll be really quick in this. ALS is a really bad disease. It's very rare. But a lot of people ask for a change in the law to be assisted to die because your brain is fine and you lose your whole body quite quickly. So it's a terrible, terrible disease. But he just noted a paper that came out in 2009 or 18, I think. And the WHO had warned about these mechanisms maybe being a problem with statin use in 2007. Then they went quiet because someone made a phone call. So they never talked about it again, of course. But this paper came out in 18. I'm amazed it was published. The risk ratio, or your risk multiplier for being on statins versus not for this terrible disease, if a risk multiplier is 2 or 2.5, it's something to really worry about, like the paper I showed you a few minutes ago, 2.6 times the chance. If it's 6 or more times the chance, it's accepted to be probably causal, even though it's not a designed experiment. It's an associational thing. You're associating the risk as opposed to proving cause and effect. But if it's 6 times the risk associated with a thing, you kind of accept it's causal. You can see here 16, 17, 23 times the risk for using statins. Imagine 20 times the risk for ALS. So it is rare, but he just made the point that instead of 1,250 in UK and America for the population who are on statins, we would be now seeing, or we are seeing 25,000, but that will be lost because it's rare. No doctor will notice that. No one will notice it. But this team got the numbers. So it's kind of really interesting. And when you 20x multiply a rare disease, again, by extension, you just know it's doing a mass of other bad things, which I've kind of gone through. Bad science, just really briefly, these trials, they were allowed to do washout periods. Now, this is astonishing, but I think it was Jupiter had 1,400 people. They put them on the drug for a short period, and then the pharma company decided to take out around 400. They were allowed to decide to take it. So that's how you do it. So then when you go ahead, you've taken out the people who have side effects. It's amazing, but it was allowed. It was allowed. Also, they're not blinded. So a real experiment is blinded. No one who's orchestrating the experiment, the doctors, the leaders, no one knows who's on the drug and who's on the placebo. Because if they know who's on the drug, they're going to make little different decisions in care. You can't do that with statins. They're all unblinded because everyone in the trial can just see the patient record and their cholesterol dropping. They know who's on the drug. So what happens is, one of the best things about statins, their best numbers, are people on statins have fewer stents, fewer revascularizations. But the problem is that the people in the trial, a guy has a kind of bit of a pain, it could be a stomach, it could be chest, they know he's on the drug and they think, well, he's on the drug, so A, he shouldn't have a problem, and B, we don't want him to have a problem because we're all working the trial and this isn't good. So let's check his stomach and let's check this and let's check that, and they check all this stuff and it ends up, actually, he doesn't seem to have a problem. He escapes. But the person who comes in with a bit of a problem and they see, oh, placebo. Now, placebo guy with a problem is good for all of us. And then they go and they send him to the cath lab, to the butcher's. The butcher's bill has to be paid. Go in the cath lab, and of course, these people generally are not healthy in these trials. You go into a cath lab, you're going to have something, and then they'll stick a stent in you because that makes a ton of money. So in other words, you bias, and you get the placebo guys loaded up with stents. And that's one of the reasons that their best improvement with statins, is lower revascularizations. But that's the kind of mechanism to achieve that. So there's loads more, but you saw the movie. Vioxx, they mentioned 2003. A funny thing happened with Vioxx. Because the European agency could not ignore the brutal fact that they now had proof that pharma companies would kill tens of thousands of people for money and hide it from them, they actually had a team look at the freedom pharma companies had to own the data. And they said, we can't really do this anymore. So they tightened the trial laws in Europe, not America, because they're gone. But in Europe, they tightened them. What happened by sheer coincidence after they tightened the laws and stopped pharma owning the data and owning everything? Well, there was a bunch of statin trials done after the change, and none of them showed a benefit. I'm sure it was a coincidence. But then they stopped doing them in Europe for obvious reasons. Because I guess they would know, damn, we're not going to see a benefit anymore unless they put the rules back where they allow us to do the fiddling. So that's not proven, but that's why I say coincidence. It's a mess. Bottom line is really this. that when there's no benefit worth a damn to anyone with a brain, effectively, why on earth would you take on all the other stuff I touched on side effects? It makes no sense whatsoever. So anyway, that's just a piece of the talk yesterday I thought I'd give, because statins comes up a lot, and people who know some of this stuff still write to me all the time and say, yeah, but Ivor, I had a heart attack. And I say, no medical advice. I just send them the BMJ paper and I says, your call. I mean, how could anyone? But I think it's the power of fear. The fear of a heart attack is deep. It's been promoted for decades. It is bad. And that fear means you say, look, I know it's probably all shite, but, oh, listen, I don't want to have a heart attack and then think, oh, but if I take... And people make irrational decisions, you know. I make a rational decision. I have a 0 calcium score 7-8 years ago. Great. I don't know what, I must get another one. But even if I had a kind of a heart attack and found out I had serious vascular disease, I can tell you truthfully, I would never take them, because I'd be just fooling myself. And I don't like fooling myself, or you guys. So we'll do a Q&A now. I think we have around half an hour. The film, the movie, some of this stuff, just anything at all really, I'd say we'd open it up.
That'll do it, folks. Hope you found that interesting and informative. And just to let you know that our best-selling book, Eat Rich, Live Long, myself and Dr. Jeffrey Gerber, it's now out on audio, and it's still selling great on paperback or Kindle. So this book puts together everything you need to know about nutrition, health and longevity, and it has full chapter, of course, on cholesterol, full chapters on insulin resistance and proteins and psychology and everything else involved in switching your lifestyle completely to get better sleep, better mental acuity, lose weight, look great, get mental and physical strength. So I think it's really, really the most useful book out there. I might be biased. And the link is down below if you wish to change your life for the better. Thank you.